Hello, everybody. How's it going? I am the real Tom Rose. I'm going to be leading your webinar this evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to cover a lot of material about the SAT and the ACT. We're also going to have some time at the end for Q&A. So anytime you'd like, feel free to post questions in the chat. There should be a live chat somewhere around the video here. If you scan the sides, you'll see a chat. Feel free to post in there. I may or may not be able to answer those questions in real time as they come in, but Danny from TestEspace is also watching. He's going to process that stuff, and so we hopefully won't miss any questions. If we do miss anything, you can always email us or Twitter us or go to testa.com and live chat with us, and we'd be happy to answer your questions anytime. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen so you can see a little presentation that we put together for you. This is the parent's guide to the ACT and the SAT. Don't worry if you're a student. You'll find most of this information valuable as well. But the audience is primarily designed for as parents, because that's what we seem to have a lot of these days. My name is Tom Rose. I'm one of two co-founders of TestEspace. I did my undergraduate training at Duke and graduate work at MIT. Just a little bit about me. And also a little bit of my past is I used to be a very high-priced tutor charging $480 a session, which was good on the one hand, but after a little while started to become unsatisfying for a couple of reasons. One, I became a little dissatisfied with pretty much serving my material to only the very wealthy. And the other thing was I became a little dissatisfied with the inability to really track whether my students were doing their homework. Oh, Danny's telling me that the slides aren't sharing very well. So hold on, let me see if I can reset that. Try that one more time. It looks good on my end. There we go. So that's just a little bit of story about TestEspace's past. Like, why did we create TestEspace? So I created it so that I could use technology to do a better job tracking down students, making sure they were getting their stuff done, and also so that we could deliver this same content to many, many more families, and it could be more affordable and more accessible to people. And I'm happy to say that TestEspace has now served over 250,000 families. So we're really fortunate and really lucky to be able to work with you guys. So let's just get right down to it. Why are we here today? We're here because the ACT and the SAT matter because they affect where your child can be accepted to college. That's heavy. So how do we handle that? Well, let's start to break it down. Number one, how does the SAT and the ACT factor into college admissions, right? So if you actually follow this down the track of applying to college and trying to get in, where does the rubber meet the road and how does that look? Well, let's look at the anatomy of a college admissions application. You can really divide this into two parts. You have an objective part and you have a subjective part of the application. I've listed the two objective parts here. They are grades, so your GPA or your class rank. All those are kind of the same thing on a college application. Then you've got your SAT and ACT scores. You only need one of those, right? But that would be in the number 2 slot. Those two things make up what we call the objective part of your application, meaning you can compare student to student directly in an apples to apples manner. Now, the subjective parts of your application are your recommendation letters and your essays. And I know college application feels really long and complex, but really these are the 4 parts. Once you've got those 4 things done, that is your college application. So next, how do your GPA and your SAT score, your GPA and your ACT and SAT scores have an impact on admissions? Well, this is a scattergram showing how those things relate. So looks a little complex at first, but let me explain it. On the horizontal axis down here, you have test scores. This is your SAT and your ACT score. And as you go to the right, you have people that are scoring higher. On the vertical axis, over on the left, that's showing student GPA. And so student GPA is getting higher as you go up that side axis. I don't know if you can read the numbers, but there's a 4.0 at the top on the left. And down in the bottom right of this, you've got the 36 on the ACT and the 1600 on the SAT. Now, every dot on here represents a student application to college. Blue dots and green dots represent acceptances to, this is Boston University scattergram. So these are acceptances to Boston University. Every red and yellow dot is a rejection to Boston University. And what I'm trying to show with this chart is the relationship between SAT and ACT score and also GPA to admissions at Boston University. And there's a very clear relationship. You can see that as your SAT and ACT score moves to the right, you're much more likely to be in this blue and green dotted zone. Same thing with GPA. In fact, you can kind of see Boston University, they kind of have sort of a floor at 3.0 with GPA. You can see all those dots sort of clustering around there. They clearly have some kind of policy about that, which is driving this type of behavior. And other schools look similar, not exactly the same, but similar. Obviously, their SAT and ACT scores will cluster around different regions depending on how competitive that school is. But you almost always see the same behavior where you do better on your GPA, you do better on your test scores, your admissions chances go up. So that's what we're all here trying to do, is maximize those admissions chances. Now, between GPA and SAT, ACT score, which one of those should you spend your time changing? Well, once you hit junior year, so for those of you who are juniors or about to be juniors, so if you're a sophomore and you're about to hit your summer before junior year, your GPA is relatively fixed, right? What matters when you apply is your average GPA, and you've already laid down 2 years of GPA. And when you apply to college, you only have 3 years worth. So 2/3 of that is already done. So if you do really well on your GPA, that can help a little bit. It can help bring that up, as part of that 1/3. On the other hand, the SAT and the ACT, those are totally greenfield, right? Those haven't happened at all. You can still do fantastic on those, and that could be a huge component of your application. So one of the takeaways is the SAT and the ACT score, those are the only objective parts of your application that you can move meaningfully in a short period of time, right? So in a matter of months, you can make a noticeable impact on your scores there. So, all right, so let's say we want to improve our scores. How do we do that? There are basically two aspects to preparing for a standardized test. And we put them into these two buckets. One bucket is what we call content knowledge. Content knowledge is, do you know the formulas for geometry? Can you do the algebra? Do you understand American English grammar and sentence structure? Can you identify words in context and comprehend reading, right? That's what we call content knowledge, being good at things. The second category is test-taking skills. Test-taking skills is stuff that's very specific to the SAT and the ACT themselves, like how to bubble on an answer sheet, how to do your pacing for the test, what types of, what order you work through the questions, and when you work through a reading question, do you read the whole passage and answer the questions, or do you answer them as you go? Little things like that. And what we suggest that people do is they allocate the vast majority of their time, 80% or more, to the content knowledge category, right? So we do a little bit of training in the test-taking skills camp, but it's really the 20%. And part of the reason why is because we have a strong belief, and we have a really great track record of success of simply helping people learn these academic basics better, perform better at them, and then driving scores from that content knowledge, which not only moves scores and is effective at moving scores, but it's also very virtuous, which is one of the things that I like about the SAT and the ACT. Part of the reason why I work in this field is that I really like helping people learn, and helping people learn who want to learn right now, and they want to do a great job very quickly. I really like that urgency and intensity. And I find that learning content knowledge in that intense manner is very virtuous. It's actually a very effective way to learn some things. So I really like that. Okay, so let's step over to some of the logistics. What are the mandatory steps that all parents must go through on this test prep journey? And I specifically worded this as what are the steps that parents must go through, because I want to differentiate the different roles from different players on the test prep journey. So I've divided this into four groups. You have the student, and you have the things that students are supposed to do. You have the parent and things parents should do. You have the guidance counselor or your school and things that they're going to do. And then you have the things that vendors are going to do. So Tested would be an example of a vendor. Now, the student, of course, needs to practice for the test, and the student needs to perform on that test. That's a very heavy task already. Anything you as a parent can do to lighten some of the logistical load of planning when the test is going to be or how to get there or signing up for the test, those are good things for you to do. Those are really helpful things that a parent can do. Also, not only are those good things for a parent to do, but we suggest that parents think of those things, and I have a list of these things here in the parent section, that you think of those as things that you are responsible for, because if you do not do them, we don't have confidence that they will get done. They may happen too late, or they may not happen at all. So you can end up strategically down a rabbit hole if you don't have an owner. So we suggest that under this category that parents plan to own all of these things, and you should write down these 4 things. So number one thing parents need to do is figure out, will your child be taking the SAT or the ACT? Now don't decide for them, right? You should work with your child, get their input, make a strategic decision. But I suggest that you as parents own making that decision, and you drive to make sure that that decision is made. I'm going to help you answer all these in just a moment, by the way. Number 2, make a test prep timeline. So this includes picking test dates. So when are you actually going to take the test? But also planning back 4 months from that date to make sure that you have time to do effective test prep, and then making sure the test prep gets started. Parents generally better at long-term planning and scheduling than high school students. That's why I suggest that parents take that role on. The third thing is signing up for the tests themselves. And the fourth thing is picking and helping pay for a test prep vendor or not. You could also decide not to do that, but if you're going to do it, I suggest you think of it as a parent role. Now, the guidance counselor in the school, what do they do? Guidance counselors and schools tend to do fairly little in this process. It's really not their main objective. So I'm speaking mostly about public schools. It's really not their objective to be doing test prep for students, right? They do a little bit of college preparation. If you have a school that's really on top of college readiness, they may have some information that they send out to parents and students on a regular basis, but they're not in a position to be holding students and parents accountable for getting things done on a timely, in a timely manner. So you really need to make sure that you're owning your column as a parent. What schools may do is they may have a free test, for example. So in several states, the SAT and the ACT are offered as a matter of course to every single high school junior. So if you're in one of those states, that's something you'll want to know, and that's something you can Google for and find out. Also, they'll send out some general information from time to time. Lastly, vendors. So if you hire a vendor, things you can hand off to the vendor are consulting, having somebody to consult on goals to make sure you're setting targets properly, somebody you can work with to build a plan, somebody who can independently work with your child to help instruct them and keep them on track, somebody to monitor progress to make sure that things are happening, and somebody to send reports out so that as a parent, you can monitor that things that are supposed to be happening are indeed actually happening, so that you can manage that process. And a lot of this is it's a huge stress reliever. It's a lot of the reason why people a lot of time work with vendors. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about whether you should take the SAT or the ACT. This is a question that almost every single parent asks us when we have a conversation with them. So it's something that it's a decision everyone has to make. And there's not a great way to make this decision. So that's why a lot of people struggle with it. So I'm going to walk you through a thought process for how you can handle this. So first of all, let me set the table a little bit by saying the SAT and the ACT, they test nearly identical knowledge. Meaning if you took somebody, you blindfold them, you set them down from the SAT or the ACT, they can't tell the difference between which one they're sitting in front of. Unless they're a really rigorous, expert on both of those tests and they know how to spot the little differences, they won't be able to even distinguish that there's different content being tested. They're so similar. However, the format is different. So for that reason, what we suggest is that you pick one and you stick with it, rather than trying to prepare for both, or preparing for one for a little while and then switching and preparing for the other one. We suggest that you don't do that. The more important thing to do, much more important than which one you pick, is picking one early and sticking with that one the whole time. Because what that allows you to do is not have to worry about a whole nother format. When I say format, I mean the number of sections is different, the timing of sections, the number of questions in each section is different. Like when the breaks are, what day of the week is on. It's all of that stuff is different. So you basically, you don't want the cognitive load of having to deal with those changes, and you don't have to. You just stick with one test and it'll be the same every time you do it. That way, as if you take these tests multiple times, the second, third time you go in, you're starting to feel like a seasoned veteran, right? You know exactly what's going to happen. It gives you confidence and calm, in the face of adversity. Also important for parents, this is new since if you took the SAT or the ACT many years ago, something that has changed between then and now is now all colleges will accept either the ACT or the SAT. And this is pervasively true, meaning you don't have to worry about, oh, well, what if I apply to such and such school? Are they going to accept the SAT? Yes, they will. 100% of colleges take either or both or neither. So you don't have to worry about which one you take. There are a few small cases. These are really small cases. But the SAT, so the SAT itself is required if you are a national merit semifinalist. So for people who take the PSAT in junior year, which is optional, you don't have to do that. But if you do, and you score in the top 1% of test takers in your state, you'll be a national merit semifinalist. Then you'll have the opportunity to take the SAT if you want to compete for a scholarship, which would be a good idea. But again, this only applies to people that score in the top 1%. So, 99% of you aren't going to have to worry about that. So that's a very small case. The other thing is the SAT subject tests. If you haven't heard of these, it's a whole nother battery of tests that you have to take after you take the SAT or the ACT. And some colleges still require those. Most colleges don't. But there are a few out there who will say, oh, we want you to take 1 or 2 SAT subject tests. My counsel on that is that you don't worry about that now. You set your primary aim on the SAT/ACT and top performance there. That is by far more important. And then later on, after you've honed your college list, you'll be able to consult that list to see, hey, am I going to have to take SAT2s? And if you do, SAT subject tests. If you have to take an SAT subject test, you can do that later, and you can squeeze that in closer to the end. Now, some states require the SAT or the ACT, and if you're in one of those states, so if you're in a state that requires the ACT, I recommend that you study for exclusively the ACT. And if you're in a state that requires the SAT, I recommend that you study for exclusively the SAT, and you don't bounce back and forth. Okay. Oh, one more thing, before we move on, which is, suppose none of those things applies to you, and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, well, I don't have to take it. Now what do I do? How do I make this choice? Well, if you've done any prep at all for either the SAT or the ACT, like any at all, even like a couple of hours, whatever one you've started on, just pick that one. The decision's not that important. You pick that one, and now you're off to the races. All the work that you've done counts. So do that. Or if you haven't done any prep at all and you're kind of just blue sky, I could start with anything under the sun. What I would do is I would pick the test that most of the people that you know are taking. And the reason for that is because if you're doing the same thing as other people around you, one of the advantages is, there's a little bit of a bandwagon effect where you're more likely to hear from other parents, hey, we're all taking the May test date or the June test date, and then you're likely to be able to process and use that information. Plus, if they have a vendor that they like, say you have a tutor that you really like who can help you prepare for the SAT, you have a friend who's got one, you could use the same one if your kid's doing the same test. So there's tiny little advantages like that. So if you have no other reason, just do what other people are doing, and that's a fine way to make the decision. Okay. How many times should you take the SAT or the ACT? Again, there have been some changes to policy for how multiple tests affect you as a test taker. First of all, these days, you now choose which scores to send to colleges. Meaning, if you take the test and you get a score that you don't like, you just don't send it. So you don't have to worry about having a bad score on your record. Also, for the vast majority of colleges, what they care about is the best score. Meaning they don't want to see like, oh, send us 4 scores and we'll do some weird averaging thing. They don't do that. They just want to know, what is your best performance? Send us that. So if you take a test 2, 3, 4 times, it doesn't matter. They just want to know best ever. So the summary of this is low scores do not hurt you, so you don't have to worry about scoring low, which means you can be more aggressive actually with scheduling your test dates and for sitting for the exam because you don't have to worry about a bad performance. In fact, there are even some schools that have started doing what they call super scoring, which is a process where you take your best ever score in a section of the test, and you combine that with your best ever section score on that same test, but for a different sitting, right? So you can take your best ever, say you're doing the ACT, you can take your best ever math, your best ever reading, your best ever writing, your best ever science. You put them all together to make sort of a Frankenstein's monster best ever super test score. And that's what they accept. So there's even more reason for you to take the test. Again, right? You don't have to improve in all areas. You could improve your admissions chances if you improve in even only one section would be enough for that sitting to help you. So for all those reasons, people are taking the test sooner and they're also taking it more times. So when should my child start preparing for the ACT? First of all, test prep timing is highly personal. I'm going to do my best in just a moment to give you a sane default schedule so that you have something concrete that you can start to latch onto. However, the best thing for you to do really is to call us to discuss this one-on-one. I'll tell you a little bit more about how to do that at the end of the presentation. But a great thing to do is just get on the phone with us. So we do this for free. We'd be glad to help you plan out a timeline that's specific to you and your child. And that's a fantastic value and experience, and it can help really make a material change on your journey, and it doesn't cost anything. So schedule one of those calls. You can do that at testiv.com. You can book it on your calendar, and we'll connect with you whenever you're free. We'll come back to that at the end. So let's look at a couple of timelines. I'm going to divide these into suggestions for students based on the graduation year of that student. So this timeline is, I'm speaking now to parents of 2020 grads. So these are current sophomores, right? So here is the optimal timeline for you if you're a parent of a sophomore, which is that you start prepping during the summer before your junior year. And I've got this gray box here to show that. And then you take your first test in September or October, depending on whether it's SAT or ACT, of your junior year. Now, the reason why most people find this to be best is because summer is a much easier time for students to prep than during the year. The year tends to get super duper crowded. I know kids are busy all the time. Summer's plenty busy also, but it's easier, right? There's just less competition. So people are able to put in more hours studying, and it's less stressful. So that's why summer tends to be a really good time to do it. Most people do it during the summer. So if you are a rising junior, right, you're a sophomore right now, I highly suggest that you do that. So you can sign up now for prep that starts in June. So that's your next step. Now, once that's done, you have an opportunity for a backup. So you can, if you get your scores back and you start looking at colleges and your scores aren't good enough for the colleges that you're targeting, then you have a backup opportunity. You can prep in the spring of your junior year, and you can plan to take a second test May or June of your junior year. And that's a great backup window. Once that's over, suppose you still don't get the score that you want. And, this happens to about, 40% of people or so that take that second test. They're like, oh, I was close, but not quite there. Now, every triangle here is another possible test you could take. And you could see that. So we call this a last chance test, where you're like, okay, I took the test a couple of times. There's a few more months. I can pick one of these and I can take the test another time. And you can see that there's several chances for a last chance test here on this timeline, this is what makes this timeline great, is that if you stay on this timeline, by the time you get to July, when you're a rising senior, you have several options in front of you. So like, hey, you could use one of these for an SAT subject test, for example, if you need to do that. Or you could take your SAT or ACT again if you want to try to bump your score up a little bit. So that's great. Then your application deadlines start somewhere November, December of senior year. Okay, this timeline that I'm showing right here, this is the timeline for 2019 grads. So if you are a parent of a current junior, this is your timeline. And there really is not much flexibility on this timeline. There aren't many choices. You're basically on this timeline right now. So it's a little bit simpler in the sense that there's not really any much you can do. There's no decisions to be made. So what you should be doing if you're a parent of a junior is you should be having them prepare right now. Start preparing as soon as possible and take the May or the June test that happens this May or June of junior year and have that be your first test. It's really important that you do a great job prepping in this window because, sorry about that. It's really important that you do a great job prepping in this window because what you want is to give it a good shot. And if you don't make it, then you have a backup. You still have a backup shot, which is you can prepare during the summer, this summer, and you can take a second backup test in September of senior year. This is a little tight because I call it a second chance instead of a last chance because there is one more test that you could take in December. It's after some application deadlines have already happened, but not all of them. So many colleges, like 80 or 90% of them, have deadlines that are after this December test. So you could potentially squeak that December test in and like call the colleges and say, hey, that score is coming a little late. And that can work. So you do still have that slightly after the deadline last chance thing. But that's why it's so important for you to hit these prep windows. Because if you slip a little bit, it collapses down into one. So here's an example of that. This is the most, every job has a painful part. The most painful thing in test prep is this scenario right here, is when people either do no prep or they do really weak prep spring of junior year. Sometimes they take a test May or June, but they really didn't prepare effectively for it. So it's they're kind of going in unprepared. So they're very unlikely to get a winner, like a score that meets their expectations. So what that means is that they're doing their main prep during the summer before senior year. And then their first serious attempt, so the first time they go to sit for the test is really stressful because it's both their first time and possibly their last time. And so that can be really intense. It's not a good condition for giving your best performance when you have that worry of like, oh man, if this doesn't go so well, then what do I do? Danny's saying we've got a topical incoming question. Okay, this is a good question. My junior is busy with hockey this winter. Is there any way we can wait? Not really. In particular, it depends. So no, I would do it now anyway, even though it's really inconvenient. So I'll bring you back to this timeline. If you don't do it now, that puts you on this timeline. Or I guess I shouldn't say no, it can't wait, but the trade-off is the following. You have to make the following hard choice. Either you're going to double up on activities now, meaning you're squeezing in test prep, even though it's sort of busy with athletics right now. That's choice number one, which is annoying. Or Choice number 2 is you can move over to this timeline here, the one that I'm telling you you don't want to be on. And this timeline has the problems that I was just mentioning, which is it's an uber stressful timeline because you're going to be doing prep for a test that there's no backup for. So if it were me, I'd rather be busier now and know that I have a second chance than skip it now and then be facing a test with no backup. Personally, that's how I would do it. Also, there's, depending on how serious your child is with hockey, so we actually work with a lot of really high-end athletes. If you're going to be targeting like a D1 or a D2 school, you really need to get your testing done early because that's going to be a big part of recruiting, right? When the coaches at the schools that you're trying to get into to play hockey, when you're talking with them, they're going to want to know what are your SAT and ACT scores, because that's one of the main things that'll govern whether they can recruit you for their team, because you have to pass admission standards for that school. So you don't want to go into the recruiting season without a score in hand. And if you wait till the summer to start doing that, recruiting will have already started. Keep the questions coming. That was awesome. In summary, when should your child start preparing for the ACT or the SAT? For 2019 grads, time is short. Sign up for something and start right now. You want to log at least 3 months of prep before whatever spring test you're taking. So there's tests in May and June. So work back ideally 4 months from there. And that's when you need to be starting, which is like right now, basically. If you're a 2020 grad, the thing to be doing is focusing on the summer. So get ready to start prep right when school, I would start right when school lets out, or when school lets out plus a week, something like that. And plan to take the September 8th ACT or the October 6th SAT is what I would plan for. So on to how we can improve scores. So the science of mastery can be applied to the ACT or the SAT as readily as it can to any skill. So for example, you've got fantastic basketball players, right? There's nothing about basketball and top performance at basketball which is magic. It can be completely broken down into a set of controllable skills. Those skills can be practiced and your performance can be improved. And if you break it down, practice those sub skills, you will become a better basketball player. You can be faster, you can be better at dribbling, you can make fewer turnovers, you can sink more shots, you can be a better free throw shooter. All of that stuff is within your control and within anybody's control. The same thing is true of learning. The same thing is true of your performance at math, writing, reading comprehension. You can break those down into masterable sub-skills and you can master those sub-skills. And when you start to do that, the SAT and the ACT, they actually pretty much only cover academic. One of the great things about it is they cover academic basics: reading, writing, arithmetic. It is the building blocks of what makes you successful academically is the stuff that is being tested on these exams. So you've seen all that stuff at school already. And what we're talking about when we say improving your performance is honing that. And it's going back and finding the things where maybe you didn't quite get it the first time, and now you really want to master it. So what we do at Testive is everything about our software and about our coaching. So we haven't talked about our coaching yet, but all of our students work one-on-one with human coaches. Everything that you do with your coach and everything that the software guides you to do is designed to lead to and reinforce that same type of mastery. There's a question coming in, which is, do most students who get into top colleges enroll in some kind of test prep program? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I know what the percentage is, but I can say that, because I haven't quite looked at it from that angle before, but I can say that certainly many of them do. So I'm thinking about my own undergrad class. So like, entering Duke students pretty much all use prep. One of the things that's tough is a lot of people do a ton of prep and they lie about it and tell you they didn't do any prep. And it's kind of like one of the features of the landscape. But I think there's a hidden faulty logic in the question. Do most students who get into top colleges enroll in some kind of test prep program? It doesn't, whatever the answer is to that question, it doesn't matter for you. So when you're trying to decide, should I be doing some kind of test prep, I recommend a thought process along the following lines, which is you go look at some schools that you want to go to, and you look up the average test scores for admission into those schools. And that's stuff that's public. Almost all schools publish it because it's one of the things that's in public rankings for those schools. So you can Google, say you want to go to Rutgers, you can Google Rutgers average SAT admission scores, and you'll find a link, one of the top results on Google that has that data. So you can get that information, okay? Then take a practice test. Don't leave this stuff up to chance, right? Just take a practice test, figure out where you stand, compare those two numbers. If you want to go to Rutgers and your score is below what the average admissions standard is at Rutgers, then you need to do a prep program. And it doesn't matter whether lots of people do it or no one's doing it. Maybe you don't know anyone who's doing it, but that doesn't matter. The world is your oyster if you prepare properly for it. Now, if you take a practice test and you want to go to Rutgers, you take a practice test and your score is comfortably above the admissions criteria there, then you don't need to do a program. It doesn't matter if everyone's doing a prep program. You're already where you need to be. So that's how I would do it. I would take a highly personal approach to it and really not worry about what other people are doing. So let me talk a little bit about the mechanics of how to improve your score. So we run a basic cycle with all of our students. The first thing you do is and I was just talking about this a second ago, the first thing you do is you get a baseline score. And when you're getting a baseline score, what you want to do is you want to take a real ACT or a real SAT. And both College Board, the maker of the SAT, and ACT, the maker of the ACT, publish retired real tests that you can buy and sit down in the comfort of your own home and take. And you can do it under timed test conditions with a stopwatch. And you can score it afterwards. They provide a rubric and a scoring table. And you can find out exactly how you would have performed on that test if you had sat for that exact one when it was delivered, when it was an official actual test. This is the gold standard of figuring out how you would do, is a real retired practice test. And that's really the only great, authentic way to figure out how you'll perform. There's a lot of test prep companies around the world that they make their own entrance test. And I just think that's the worst policy ever. What some guy takes a bunch of questions and throws them together, you answer them and they give you a score. You have no reason to think that score has any resemblance to true scoring. And in fact, we work with people who sort of wash out of these programs all the time. And they're like, oh, but they told us that our score was going to be XYZ. And then we sat for the test and it was completely different. And it's yeah, I don't know, that test that they gave you, I don't know what that was. There's really no reason why you can't sit down and just do a real SAT. That stuff you can buy on Amazon for $15 and you can sit for a real SAT. So there's really no reason not to do that. So number one, get a baseline score. Number two, set a goal score. The authentic, good way to set a goal score is to make a list of colleges that you want to go to. Then look at the admissions criteria for those schools and use that to drive your goal, personal goal. What you should not do is ask your friends what their score is and derive your target around what their score is, or drive your number around the average score at your high school or some other sort of global metric. Remember, college admissions is 100% personal. What matters is you and you alone, and whether you're qualified to go to the school that you want to go. That's what matters. So figure out where you want to go to school and then work backward from there. Number three, identify areas of weakness. So once you've got this baseline score, what you've got is a practice test that has a whole bunch of data, juicy data in it. So if you took one of the tests that we have available at Testiv, oh yeah, I should also say another place where you can get these practice tests is at Testiv. You go to testiv.com, create an account, and you can download practice tests for free off of our website that are, again, real retired tests. So SAT and ACT has some PDF versions that you can get, and we have them aggregated. So you can go get those, and if you answer those exact tests, one of the ones that we're pointing you toward, you can then take your answers, plug them back into Testive, and we will analyze the data for you, and we will not only score it for you, but we will give you a pretty bar chart with all sorts of information about categories, subcategories, and strengths and weaknesses. So the next thing you want to do then is analyze that stuff. Figure out what you're great at and what you're not so great at. And then you want to practice regularly in the weak areas. The weak areas are where you have a big opportunity for improvement. This is important because many students left to their own devices like to churn on questions in their strong areas because that's fun and interesting. And they're strong in, you're strong in an area for a reason. It's because you like it and you're good at it. And it's hard and painful and annoying to study all the things that you're bad at. So you really need to think critically about that and make sure that you're focused on something that you're bad at, which requires admitting it. And then review your failures. So, when you're endeavoring to learn or to better yourself, you're really hunting for something you cannot do, right? Something you tried to do, you tried your hardest to complete and failed. And those failures, those are your opportunities. So every time you have a failure of some kind, you try to answer a question, you get it wrong, pick yourself up, and before you move on, really dig deep on that. So what we do at Testive is we have recorded videos for every question. So when you get that question wrong, we interrupt your learning flow and give you this video to watch. And you can watch it as fast or slow as you want. You can watch it as many times as you want. You can watch it 50 times in super slow-mo until you really feel like you know what to do. Then there's still one more step before you move on, which is document your learnings. So it's not enough to just understand what went wrong, but what you really need to do is write down in your own words, for your own benefit, what you will do differently next time. And this is where the rubber meets the road for high-end learning. People that do good analysis and they write really good notes to themselves about themselves and then review those notes are people that learn and improve really, really quickly. This behavior, writing good review notes, is the single activity that correlates with score improvement most for students in the tested database. So when we analyze it, this is the activity that matters. So we do with our software and with our coaches is we're always focused on making sure that people are completing this step as rigorously as they can. Lastly, report improvement to your supporters. So people don't prepare in a vacuum, right? You have your coach, you've got you're working with Testive, you've got a student success advisor who's working with the parents, and you've got your parents, and you got the student, and all of these people need to communicate together. So we collect all that information, we put it together in a report, and we send it to everybody once a week so that everybody's on the same page with like what's going on, what's working well, what's not working, and what the plan is. Then you repeat. So you just take those 7 steps, you go in a loop, and you just keep going and going and going and going until you reach your goal score. And that's your ending criteria, is you've made it. That process is entirely manageable. The challenge is getting started. Getting started is a real challenge. Test prep is one of the most procrastinated things that people do because it's very important, but it's not urgent. It never feels like it has to happen tomorrow. So that it's tomorrow, tomorrow, and tomorrow, and then it happens too late, right? So that's the main risk factor, is not moving forward. So you're a parent. How do you get your child to start test prep? Here's how you don't do it. You may have discovered that nagging your kids to do test prep, not the most efficient use of your time. You don't like doing it. They don't like doing it. They don't like hearing it, etc. So what can you do instead? Well, one thing you can do is make an appointment at Testive to talk to us. And what we'll do is we'll help you pick a test date. And once you've got that test date, you can put it on a calendar. And then that test date, you can work on that with your child. And then having a scheduled test on an actual date in the near future, that creates a real reason to get started. right? Until you schedule that test date, it's all imaginary. But once you put it on the calendar, you mark it with a big red circle. Now it's a real thing. Now it's a thing you can and should prepare for. And the second thing is, if you sign up for test prep help with Tested with one of our coaches, they'll start working with your child on a weekly basis, one-on-one, over video chat, and make a plan and then help them stick to that plan. So if you just sign up, things will start to happen immediately, and then we'll manage all of that for you. So that's the other way. Now, the most common failure mode is from the student's angle. We covered sort of like from the parent's angle, the failure mode is not getting started. From the student's angle, what is the thing that the failure mode in terms of people who are trying to prep but don't go as far as they'd like? What is the biggest reason for that? The biggest reason for that is not spending enough time on task. So you're looking at a chart here of two groups. You've got, this is tested, the top bar here, the light blue one, that's tested students who are working with a tutor. So as the months go by, students working with a tested tutor, their score continues to improve at a fairly regular pace. Students, this is the bottom bar chart, or sorry, the bottom line on this, the dark blue one, that is tested students working solo, meaning they're using our free software. They're not working with a coach though, they're just on their own recognizance. You can see that they improve at roughly the same rate for about the first month, and then they kind of plateau. This is not because of any limitation in the software, it's because they don't do it enough. So coach students, if you go dig into this data, I don't have a chart of this, but it's down here on the bottom. Coach students do 6 times more work over a multi-month program, and they raise their scores 3 times higher than students that are on self-study plans. So it's not that these are averages, of course, right? There's plenty of people on a self-study plan who can be successful, but as a group, it's a much lower performing group. So how do we do this? Like, what makes the difference? How do we get people to stay on task? Well, every one of our students is assigned a human coach who meets with them one-on-one once a week over video chat. Looks just like this. And so they're doing their work. They can meet with their coach, discuss any challenges they've got. They make a plan. They make a highly specific plan. How many questions they're going to do, what days of the week they're going to do it, what time of the day they're going to do it on those days of the week. It's super duper specific. And the coach text messages with them throughout the week. So, it could be every day of the week if the student is really struggling that week. Or they won't check in at all if the student's really humming and things are going great. But the coach will always monitor that in the background. And they'll send reports to parent once a week. So the parent can kind of audit that process casually at a little bit more of a distance. Here are some of our coaches. Just to give you an example, we have many, many more. They're all, just really wonderful people. They've all scored in the 99th percentile of the tests that they're teaching, but they all also love education, love working with students. And when we hire them, that's the criteria that we use, is whether students would think of them as an inspirational role model. So, we can always find somebody to match up with your child that's got some kind of personal overlap that we can find. We play the same sport, or like, you went to Rutgers, I want to go to Rutgers, that kind of thing. So what is the next step? Very next step is that I would suggest for all of you guys is talk to a tested student success advisor to make a testing timeline specifically for you and your child. And that's, I went through some of the generics here today, but it doesn't cost you anything. It's very much worth your time to schedule an appointment with us and walk through what you should do and when. There's no obligation there. We'll help you set up that plan. If you want to work with a coach, we can also help match you up with a coach on that call as well. We can take you through some of your options. Some good questions. There's some good questions for you to ask right here. When should I take the SAT? Should I take the SAT or the ACT? How do I get my kid to start test prep? And how can I fit prep into the schedule? Right? We actually covered all of those questions already today. But if you want to talk about it more specifically relating to your child, we can do that for you. So go over to tested.com. You can do that right now. You can go over there and click the blue button on the homepage and schedule a call right now. There's also a live chat. So if you want to just jump on and start chatting with folks right now, I think Danny, Molly, and Lorena are all over there on the live chat. So if you go over to tested.com right now and jump on the live chat. You can get a little bit of a personal consultation right now. This is the last slide. I'm going to jump over and do some Q&A now. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the live chat. And Danny's going to be monitoring that and feeding them to me, and we'll try to go in order. If I miss something, please post it again. I apologize for that. We're trying to be comprehensive and thorough. We're not cherry picking, but we might miss something. And for those of you who have seen your fill, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the materials. If you'd like to get in touch, go to tested.com. Please reach out. All right, Danny, these are rolling in. Let me tackle some of these. Okay, one, I'd like to learn what tips and techniques are for taking the reading portion of the SAT. Our son has a good grasp on math, but struggled with the reading section. Okay, so let me ask a follow-up question, which is, what is your native English speaking status? Post that in the chat window. I'm curious whether is your son a native American English speaker or a non-native American English speaker? The reason why is my counsel is different depending on which situation it is. So if you're a non-native American English speaker, what I found is the single biggest driver of improvement is going through reading passages in real time with a native American English speaker. I say American English because both of these tests test American English, not English or Indian English or South African English, right? It's like the American version of English. So you really need to be working with a native American English speaker. So what you want to do is sign up for a program where you can sit one-on-one with a human and go through those passages together, and you read them together, and then you answer questions. And when you're confused, they kind of reach in and try to tease out what the confusion is, and then slowly correct those things one by one. And it's really, it's like time with person is what you're looking for there. If you are a native American English speaker, then the limiting factor there, I've often found for most students are the very first stop that you want to do is you want to go over generic test taking strategy for the reading section in general, right? So if you just went, like if your son, is it son? Yeah, you said, okay. If your son just went into the PSAT sort of unprepared and sat down for the reading section, good news. Like there's a ton of strategies that you can apply to the reading section specifically to improve performance across that section. So things such as you read the passage in its entirety, then you answer the questions one by one. Sometimes people try to do that in reverse order. They try to like read the first paragraph and then answer a question, read the second paragraph and answer a question. What you can end up doing is really slowing yourself down when you do stuff like that. So you can work on some techniques that help improve this. Now, if you're a native American English speaker and you've already gone through all the test tricks and strategy type stuff for improving on the reading section, then the next step is practice, right? Just practice, practice, practice. It means like, you know the strategies, you know the language, you just need exposure. So, get on a test prep program and focus your time on reading and get exposure. So this is just like that slide with LeBron James. It's time on task. And so reading comprehension. So in my family, we have a genetic predisposition to dyslexia. My mother's generation, there were 7 kids in that nuclear family, and like 4 of them have diagnosed dyslexia, and the other 3 are just in denial about it. And so I've really watched. I've watched how this can be frustrating. And, if you're struggling with reading comprehension, it's brutal. It is like not fun to read because it makes you feel like, or let me just say it this way. It's such a slog. It's like you don't like reading. It's not your strong suit. You hate being dragged through it. So in life, you tend to shy away from it. But what you really need to do now is the exact opposite of that. You need to like sit down, lay out 4 or 5 passages and just crush them, right? You need to like go through that stuff. You need to go through it at a deep level. You need to go through it with a human coach. You need to discuss that stuff. So you need to do the opposite of the avoidance type tactics that maybe you've been applying so far. Okay, enough on that one. how much of SAT and ACT are valued in public colleges versus private colleges? Are there any differences between colleges in terms of importance in admissions decision? Yes. So this was from an email. There's big differences, huge differences across all different colleges. So one general thing is at almost all colleges, higher scores mean better admissions chances. However, there's diminishing returns at different schools depending on what the average admissions scores are for that school. So if you go to school where average admissions scores are 1,200 SAT and you have a 1,400, there's no benefit in going to 1,450. Right. So that's a difference, right? So you want to know like where they line up. In terms of like, does Duke University and UNC, do they handle the SAT and ACT differently? Not really, no. It's a big criteria in their decision. And that's what matters. Let's see. Now, in terms of the importance in the admissions decision, that's different at every school. And I would say more so than public and private is the, as a lens here, is the competitiveness of the school. So schools that are really, really, really competitive, top tier schools, you need a top flight SAT or ACT score to be in the running at those schools. Even with that score, it's still low odds of admission, right? If you don't have the scores you need, it's like no odds, right? Because they have their pick of the litter, right? There's like, they're accepting 1 in 10 applicants. So they just filter everybody who doesn't have the scores. Okay, we still have 5 times too many applicants. Now look for people who are superlative in other ways. So depending on the competitiveness of the school, you have kind of a different landscape. Okay, we're at an hour now. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. Thank you guys for coming. We have a few more questions in email that I don't think we got to, but I don't wanna keep you here. So don't feel rude if you're taking off. If you guys want to see a few more, I'm gonna go through the email that we got. I'll do these faster. What is the average point increase for SAT and ACT using your services? So the average SAT and ACT improvement for all of our students across the board, including the ones that, there's a small number of people that drop out of the program, like 5%, but we include all those in our data, is about 100 points on the SAT and about 3 or 4 points on the ACT. And that includes all people. So some people prep for a month, some people prep for 5 months. People that prep for 5 months obviously improve their scores as a group more than people who prep with us for 1 month. So it's not uncommon for people to improve their scores 200-300 points on the SAT, 4 or 5, 6 points on the ACT. So those are the types of things that you could hope for. But you have to put in the time, you got to put in the effort, right? Does Testive offer an online course with an instructor, or is it the course online based? So if you work with Testive, your student will be matched up with a human coach who works with them one-on-one, and they meet once a week, and they do it over video chat. So it'll be virtual, meaning you'll be on Skype or Google Hangout, but you will, but it'll be a real human. It'll be the same human every time, just like you would if you were in person. You just don't have to drive anywhere, which is awesome. All right. Why Testive? How are you better than your competitors? Like one of the big differences between Testive and our competitors is we have an integrated approach with a live human coach and an adaptive online software tool. So many companies are one or the other, right? So like you can call up a company that's like, oh, we're a tutoring firm, we'll match you up with a tutor, right? That's a thing. And you've got companies that are online tools. Like, hey, you give us a couple $100 and we'll give you access to this software tool. You could have as much as you want. We do a mixture of that. So you have the software tool, and then you have a human coach who keeps your student on track to make sure that they do the work. And what we found is that time on task and getting the work done, that's the driver of success. So we really that's another big differentiator. We focus all of our effort on time on task and people writing good review notes, because we found that correlates with real learning, and we found that real learning correlates with score improvement. So that's how we approach it. So it works, and students also usually really love that because we're not really we're not like super tips and tricks focused. And when people are learning real things, like when you master geometry, that feels fantastic. So students really like that. How long will my child have access to TestEspace? What is the cost? So you'll have access to TestEspace software basically forever after you sign up. You'll work with your coach as long as you continue to pay for it. Another question here is, what is the cost? It's $350 per month. And you get unlimited access to the software, and you meet with your coach once a week for every month that you're doing that. So you can do 2, 3, 4, however many months you want, and you can start and stop at at your discretion. I think we covered that. Covered reading. How much are valued in colleges? We covered that. What's more effective in studying? Oh, this is a great question. What's more effective in studying? Regular amount of time spent on SAT for 1 year, or focused large amount of time for 6 months? I would say focused large amount of time for 6 months. A year is just too long. You get to burnout. If you're prepping for a year, better to do a more focused thing for 6 months. Even 6 months might be a little long. The average at TestEspace is about 3.5 months. I think if you have time, 4 months is a good block to set aside. I don't think you need to plan for 6. Sometimes people end up with 6, but what they do is you do 4 months and then you take your first test. Your intention is to do great on that test and then be done forever. But if you don't get the score that you want, maybe you do another month later, but it's several months later, right? So you wait for your scores to come back, you take a little break, you do a month of prep, and then you run it again. So that might be a 5th month. And then maybe you do that again if you want to do it even again. So maybe that's your 6th month. But it wouldn't necessarily be like, January to June, 6 months all on a block like that. You didn't ask this, but a corollary to that is it better for you, generally speaking, for learning, is it better to do fewer, longer learning sessions or more shorter sessions? And I'm a big fan of more shorter learning sessions. And this is like on the micro scale. So how many days per week do you prep? I'd rather have you prep 30 minutes a day, 6 days a week, than have you prep 3 hours a day, 1 day a week. So we encourage all our students to pick smaller bites, but many, many more times per week. People say reading newspaper opinions or Time magazine helps your understanding logical thinking. There's no doubt that exposure to good writing helps reading comprehension. I've always found, though, that when somebody says like, oh, you want to improve your reading score on the SAT, you should read Time magazine. It's sort of like, it's like, oh, you want to get better at driving? Well, you should watch race car movies or something. It's like, it maybe helps, but it helps at such a diluted degree that it's not going to have a tremendous impact on your score. But it's still a good thing to do. I think reading good literature and exposing yourself, that is a virtuous path. So if somebody wants to improve their comprehension, they should absolutely do that. In the short run, I think there are other things you can do to improve your score quicker, such as exposing yourself to more critical reading passages on the SAT itself. Like if you're going to read something, you might as well read those. It's actually like true history is what they put in there. So like if you're just reading passages, you're kind of like learning stuff, and it's entertaining actually to a certain degree. All right, I think I've covered all the questions that we've seen come in. Thank you guys for the questions. That was really lively stuff. And thank you for staying to the end of the Q&A if you're still with us. That's all for today. Happy prepping.